Good evening. I'm Donna Bartlett May with the League of Women Voters of San Diego, and I will be your moderator for this virtual candidate forum. Even though we miss seeing you in person, we are reaching more people via Zoom who can hear directly from the candidates to help make this an important decision on the ballot. And you don't even have to get dressed or comb your hair. I think we're going to love Zoom for some time to come. The League is proud to be nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties, but always working on vital issues of concern to members and the public. Our Voters Edge website is your online resource for more information about the candidates, ballot issues, and detailed voting information. All candidates for local offices have been invited to include their information there at no cost, and both candidates tonight have provided this information. You'll find a link in the chat for that. The League moderates candidate forums using a format that is fair, balanced, yet informative. We have asked the candidates to keep to the issues of the position rather than personal attacks because our goal is for the voters to be able to learn more about the candidates than they can from campaign ads and social media. We are recording the forum and it will be available unedited from beginning to end on our website, lwvsandiego.org. The FCC does require that this congressional forum recording must not be edited and must be broadcast in its entirety. We asked attendees to submit questions online before the forum, but you may also submit questions using the link provided in the chat box. Just please remember to use civility and respect in wording your questions and frame them so both candidates can answer. Questions will be organized to assure topics of greatest interest are asked. Assisting tonight as lead question screeners are Rachel McDonald Hernandez and Jane Andrews, and the screener from the Clairemont Town Council is Judith Munoz. The timekeeper is League member Scarlett Lopez. We plan to adjourn by 8 p.m. Sorry, 7 p.m. No, 8 p.m. I'll get it right. With that said, I want to thank you all for joining in on this Zoom webinar to become a more informed voter. This is the forum for Congressional District 52. Candidates will have 2 minutes for their opening statement and 2 minutes for their closing statement and 1 minute to respond to each question from the audience. We will alternate who answers each question first. Mr. DeBello will have the first opening statement and Mr. Peters will have the first closing statement. So Mr. DeBello, your opening statement, please.
Well, thank you, Donna. And it's a wonderful pleasure to be here with the League of Women Voters and your service to our community to inform voters on important discussion points. And also I'd like to give a shout out to Scott. Scott, I introduced myself to you at the airport not long ago, gave you my business card. Never heard from you, but this is a wonderful chance to engage with you on this election. And I hope we can do it many more times before November 3rd. I'm calling you tonight from the DeBello bus. This is my campaign school bus. I've driven it hundreds of miles throughout our district to meet our voters, to hear their concerns, listen to their voices. And they're concerned that they don't have a voice in Washington, that Congress is detached from America. And it's no wonder with a 20% approval rating. I think it's incumbent upon us to replace the incumbents who have stayed too long and accomplished too little. Scott Peters, in his 8 years, hasn't passed a single bill that he's authored that has actually gone into legislation. If you would eliminate one, that is the naming of a federal courthouse, which I consider you can hire a marketing agency for that. I think it's very important to know that I'm a local businessman. I'm a technology entrepreneur. I'm a lifelong San Diegan. I'm best known for inventing a product, mobile check deposit, which is used by 80 million Americans. It helps save them time, makes their lives more efficient, and frankly has an ancillary benefit to the climate with reduced carbon emissions. I've created hundreds of high-paying jobs in our district in the 52nd and throughout San Diego throughout my business career. And I've also operated companies in 6 different countries, including China, notably, where I lived and worked among the Chinese, understand that culture, their business practices. And this is a big threat and an opportunity to America as we are in the 21st century. So I believe that the biggest issues that we face today as we exit, hopefully soon, the COVID period is economic recovery, job creation, particularly as technology has taken over. So
Thank you, Mr. DeBello.
Skills to approach this.
Mr. Peters?
Thank you to the League and Donna, to you and the Clairemont Town Council for hosting us tonight. And although I'd prefer to be with you in person, I did get to spend some time with some of you at the Clairemont Family Days and actually got to operate a weed whacker, which doesn't happen a lot anymore. It's been my great honor to represent Clairemont in the United States Congress. And here in San Diego, as Jim said, we're about as far away from Washington, D.C. as any place in the country. But I've made it my priority to correct the two places by focusing on the main pillars of San Diego's economy while I'm in Washington. Our role in the national defense accounts for 20% of our jobs. And I spent 4 years on the Armed Services Committee, where I secured funding for the new coastal campus training facility for our Navy SEALs, airfield improvements for MCAS Miramar, and new piers for Naval Base San Diego, which I visited just last week, and they're well under construction. Together, that represents over $1 billion investment in San Diego by the federal government, working now with the Navy and the city of San Diego to create a new headquarters for NAVWAR, which you used to know as SPAWAR. Border trade is also an economic engine for our region, and the way President Trump talks about Mexico and the border is both shocking and sad. But the San Diego delegation, including Daryl Issa when he was with us, worked hard to fund the $750 million new border crossing at San Ysidro. A third economic pillar is science and technology. We fought a takeover of Qualcomm and to support their foundational role in research into 5G. And I fought to increase funding in basic scientific research at the NIH, which so many of our local research institutions depend on. And that budget's increased from $29 billion to over $40 billion since I've been in Congress. Finally, tourism has been devastated by COVID. I helped pass the CARES Act, which provided forgivable loans to small businesses, voted for changes to make it more flexible, and will continue to advocate for a national response that is coordinated and based on science. And I've passed several laws focused on local priorities into law, and I look forward to talking about them tonight.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll start with some general questions submitted by the audience. Mr. Peters, you'll answer first. What will be the biggest issues facing the next session of Congress?
Well, we're still in the middle of a global pandemic, that's unfortunately, I think, largely we've seen this administration really fail as being able to manage it. So a few things. One is we have to have a good stockpile for basic personal protective equipment. My committee will work on that, and also making sure that we don't run out of basic pharmaceuticals. I've introduced a bill to make sure that we get the right kind of data. We have a lot of data, but no information, because every state reports different data. It's very difficult to make conclusions about how to behave on that, how to act, how to make policy if you get different data from everybody. So we need to coordinate that, and we'll be able to draw conclusions about how to fight that. President Obama gave President Trump a map for making this part of the National Security Administration. President Trump fired that. We need a new president who will see an international role for this too, and understand that this is a global threat.
Thank you very much. Mr. DeBello?
It's clear to me that economic recovery is job number one as we enter the next Congress. And we have to open our economy safely, and we have to get people back to work. Regrettably, in the hospitality industry and in transportation, those jobs aren't coming back very soon at all. So we also have to invest and also be creative, innovative in the areas of education, providing choice and providing vocational training. It's all about job recovery. I have built jobs. I have created high-paying jobs for San Diego, and we need to continue doing that. So having the ability to write and sign the front of a paycheck, which I've done for my entire career, will be an asset for me as I work towards economic recovery post-COVID and as we emerge from this crisis.
Thank you. Another general question. What is the first legislation you would want to introduce in the next session of Congress, Mr. DeBello?
Well, I think it's very important to think about how we react to our school and educations. I believe in the possibility of choice and opportunity in America for advancements for all. We are a great American dream still. We have great opportunities ahead of us here in the 21st century, the tip of the iceberg with technology advancements that will benefit all of us. But for people to take advantage of that, we need to focus our schools on education that will help in the 21st century. Managing your personal finances is just one of them, but we need more scientists. We need more educators. We need more people with competencies in math and literature to help us create the economy for the future. Fortunately, we're coming off of a strong economy, although we've been set back by coronavirus. This is not my first rodeo. I was in China during SARS, and we successfully operated a company throughout that pandemic then. We can do it here in America.
Thank you. Mr. Peters?
Thanks, Don. I'm working on a number of bipartisan bills around climate change that not only would reduce carbon pollution and abate some of the biggest risks that we face, but would also create jobs. One of them is the Use It Act, which is a bipartisan bill with co-sponsors in the Senate. I'm hoping to get that passed this year into law that would actually help us through new technologies pull carbon out of the air and sequester it underground. It's something that the UN has told us we have to do in addition to changing our fuel mix. And it's those kind of bipartisan approaches that I think are most important. You know, one of the things that it's easy to do is make speeches about what you'd like to do. And sometimes people in Washington get in the habit of talking to people that agree with them. My view is always go to the middle of the room, find people you disagree with, and see if you can't make agreement. That's where real courage takes place.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Peters, you're first on this question. What do you think are the most important issues facing the residents specifically of District 52?
Well, housing is one. I think you were just talking about that with respect to your local issues. If we don't get housing here, our children won't be able to live here. We'll continue to grow outward and cause more pollution. That's a combination of a federal, local, and state role. But I think the things I would focus on is making sure that we continue to bring investment to San Diego to create jobs. Like I said, those military investments account for 20% of our jobs, and San Diego needs to continue to be a good partner with the military through the construction of something like a new NAVWAR headquarters. We also need to make sure that we're continuing to invest in science. That's why I focus so much on increasing the budget for the National Institutes of Health. I'm endorsed by the major medical research organizations that do endorsements because they know that I'll fight for that. That's important for growing our economy as well. And then we have to bring back tourism, I think, through some of the aid programs that I've discussed previously.
Thank you very much. Mr. DeBello?
Donna, I think the number one issue faced by our residents in the 52nd District and throughout all of San Diego County is the skyrocketing homelessness continues to be in San Diego. It's a blight. It's unfortunate. We need to give these folks a helping hand, not a handout. We need to get them off the street in the proper way through rehabilitation and intervention. Right now, we have one of the highest populations of homeless and the second highest population of homeless veterans. It's inexcusable. For the past 8 years, it's grown and grown and grown with no end in sight. This is a mental health issue and one also of substance abuse primarily. Upwards of 80% need help in those areas. We can provide that, but this is a combination of efforts from the federal government, the state, and the city. And together we need to work harder at this problem and focus on it. One thing I dislike about our current Congress and even our local representatives is lack of focus on solving this issue, which affects all of us and is a blight on America.
Thank you. All right, moving on to some social issues. Mr. DeBello, what do you think Congress can do to deal with the racial unrest in our country and the demonstrations?
Now, this is a critical issue for America, and it has been for 100 years. And obviously, we feel very, very badly about what we see in the newsreels, what we see in the footage that's captured, and the social injustice that occurs often, much, much too often. We are not a racist country. We are a country with good hearts and a country that learns from our mistakes to improve. The first thing we need to do is continue to fund our police, to give them the credit for their efforts on behalf of all of our community to protect us. But we also must listen to our Black brothers and sisters. And I've done that. And it's been a revelation for me. Prior to this unrest after George Floyd's death has been the lack of understanding of what Black Americans go through on a daily basis. Having a conversation is important. I'm partnering with a Black athletic director locally to have that conversation publicly. And it's a learning experience for me, and it has to be for all Americans.
Thank you. Mr. Peters?
Thank you, Donna. I think we reached the point where we cannot continue to have this situation where Black men have to fear for their lives just by going outside and driving or going for a run. That's got to end. In Congress, we passed the Justice and Policing Act that would do a few things. among those things it would do, I think the most important things is it would provide training and support for police to do the right thing in those difficult situations, including de-escalation. And it would also take bad cops and get them out of the system. So if you have infraction after infraction, you can't just go to another department when you're fired. You'd have a registry to prevent that from happening. That would be the kind of reform I think is important. But look, we have to work with our police. They have very difficult jobs. I support the police. There's nothing a good cop hates more than a bad cop. And I'm proud to have the endorsement of both the San Diego Police Association and the deputy sheriffs, because they know that I want to work with them and support them. But we have to enlist their help in changing this culture as well, because things have to change. I think everyone understands that.
Thank you very much. The next question in social issues: what policy steps would you support to handle white supremacist groups that are committing acts of domestic terrorism? Mr. Peters?
Well, I'm not afraid to say that if you commit a crime, you should be punished. Now, I believe in peaceful protests, even protests by people whose ideas I think are reprehensible. I think that's very American. I think that we should always support that. But when you turn to looting and violence and then driving your truck into crowds, which we saw at Charlottesville, you don't say that people are very fine people. In fact, you stand up against that. And just because someone's in your own party is no reason to stay silent on that. Those people deserve to be prosecuted. There are laws for that, and I think that's very important. When someone crosses state lines with a gun to be a vigilante, and the president doesn't call him out, I think that sets a very, very bad example for the rest of the country. And all of us should be speaking up against that kind of vigilantism. That's also something that another way we can support the police and law enforcement. If you're for law enforcement, you're against vigilantism, as am I.
Thank you. Mr. DeBello?
Donna, anarchy and mob rule is reprehensible in America. It can't be tolerated. We are a country where the rule of law takes precedent, and that's why we are so successful as a nation. Any extremist group, from white supremacists to Antifa, have to be stopped, and we can't sit back like some mayors have and not respond to that. We need to stop the unrest, the looting, the violence. It's unfair to Americans. But I think it's also important that we think about the future and what we can do to replace some of the symbols of hatred. I always thought the conversation about Confederate monuments was reasonable to have, but it's gone beyond that, where statues are being torn down of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and others. But let's have that conversation about Confederate statues and monuments that pay tribute to people who want to take away America's rights. I think that's an appropriate conversation that we need to have.
Thank you. All right, moving on to some immigration questions. Mr. DeBello, what steps can be taken now to protect the dreamers?
Well, the dreamers are people who are here because they were born in America through parents that were not legal. And there are people that have the respect from me of having achieved academic success and often jobs. This is part of a bigger package that we need to address, and we can't kick this can down the road any longer. I'm regretting that our Speaker of the House sent a delegation to the border just 2 years ago, and none of our local congressional representatives were included on that. I find that difficult to understand why, where we should be up front and on the soapbox helping to solve this problem of immigration. First, legal immigration is the hallmark of this country. My grandparents were immigrants. I'm a son and grandson of immigrants. It's important that we face up that we need the reset button every year, having positive influence from immigrants who help shape the fabric of our culture. But we can't have illegal immigration. Number two, we need a robust asylum program, but one that's appropriate. And thirdly, H-1B programs to help our scientific teams grow for the benefit of our job creation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Peters?
Well, to protect the dreamers, we should absolutely endorse the DREAM Act, which would give them status. They know no other country. It's that simple. It's not more complicated than that. I've been at the border a number of times on official and unofficial business with the Chamber of Commerce and with congressional visits to both Texas and here in California. I've seen some of the camps and some of the cruelty that this administration has perpetrated against people who are trying to obey the law and do the right thing and find asylum. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we need a comprehensive immigration plan like the Senate voted for overwhelmingly bipartisan way in 2013 that would allow people to come in and do what we've always done, supplement our workforce with immigrants, reunite families, take care of dreamers, and provide border security, by the way, which is also important. It was the Republican majority that prevented us from getting a vote in the House, and I don't want to go back to the situation where we're under that rule again.
Thank you very much. All right, the next question. Many San Diegans travel frequently to Mexico. Even before COVID-19, it was taking a lot more time to cross the border. What can be done about these delays at the border? Mr. Peters?
Well, it's a difficult time now. You know, we have about 45 to 50,000 crossings a day from Tijuana to the United States of people who are either citizens or legal permanent residents of the United States entitled to come here from a place in Tijuana where conditions for COVID aren't as good as they are here. So that's already difficult. We've also, I think, appropriately tried to prevent unnecessary travel, and I think that's going to cause delays. You know, I think outside of COVID, I think there are opportunities to do what we've already done, which was created an amazing new border crossing that I think Americans can be proud of as taxpayers, that not only will facilitate more trips and more trade, but will provide more security. And we're going to try to do the same thing out in Otay. But, you know, for the time being, I think COVID makes that issue a difficult one to resolve.
Thank you. Mr. DeBello?
The issue is compounded by illegal immigration. A lot of the illegal immigration comes from China or from countries in Africa through the Tijuana border or through the water corridor linking two countries. The U.S. Coast Guard spends a lot of time interdicting illegal immigrants that come in that manner. So I think what we can deploy is greater use of technology. I'm a technology entrepreneur. I've created success for 80 million Americans, and I believe we can do that for the border crossings as well, to improve our technology, facilitate faster crossings, more secure crossings. You know, we haven't had border barriers up until this point. President Obama and President Clinton before us all wanted border barriers, and President Trump is actually getting that done. That's an important part, a first step towards funneling the appropriate immigration through our checkpoints, using technology to speed that, because we need the interaction between both of our communities. We depend on that interaction, and it is good for both of our communities.
Thank you. Moving on to some climate change questions. With wildfires and hurricanes devastating our country, it's clear climate change is impacting our environment and economy. How can we act to control carbon emissions in a way that protects jobs and community vitality? Mr. DeBello?
Well, while others talk about it and do PowerPoint presentations and have committee meetings and put 14-point plans together, I've actually done something about it. I've created technology, a mobile app, which has prevented 11 million tons of carbon emission through reducing the need to get into your car, to go to your bank, to wait in line to deposit a check. Mobile banking and technology like that allow us to reduce our carbon footprint more quickly than these nearsighted plans that want to take us back to the Stone Age. The Green New Deal is a loser from the very beginning. It tries to eliminate fossil fuels too quickly. Now let's face it, fossil fuels have been our friend to enhance our electricity deployment, which has developed our economy, but they've also affected the economy. So we need to work towards getting into more renewable, sustainable, clean sources of energy. Wind and solar are a part of that equation, but there are others as well that we have to investigate. Wind stops, the sun goes down. These blackouts are a direct result of bad policy.
Thank you. Mr. Peters?
I've been working on this a long time as a local elected official and now as a member of Congress, building communities that are more walkable, more bicycle friendly, letting you get out of your car. Also, not incidentally, building, I think, what would be the biggest infrastructure project in the history of the county, which is the light rail trolley from downtown up around to UTC through Clairemont. That's going to have the opportunity to get a lot of people out of their cars. I've also introduced a law, part of which has become part of the transportation bill, which would provide incentives to build more housing near transit. But look, we've got to decarbonize a lot of sectors of our economy, energy, transportation, building. And it's about working with other people to get things done. The reason I did not support the Green New Deal, and in fact, most Democrats have not signed on to it, is because it's really one party and it talks about remaking the whole economy. We can't wait. We need to get to work now. And that's been my orientation and will be if I'm fortunate to continue in Congress.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next question is on COVID. What leadership role should the federal government take in managing the pandemic? And why do you think there has not been, excuse me, a coordinated national effort to combat the disease?
Well, what we have is a president who wanted to wish it away. This president, we elected a reality TV star, and these elections are job interviews, and people should treat them like that. And so, unfortunately, we have someone who's just not up to the job. What we should do is, first of all, he got a 69-page report from the previous administration about what they learned about Ebola that apparently went into the trash. In 2018, President Trump fired the person who's designated as part of the National Security Administration to deal with pandemics. As I mentioned before, they have not done anything to get the right kind of data so that we can figure out exactly what the effects are from an epidemiological standpoint, what we should be doing about it. And we have no stockpiling strategy or no initiative from the administration to do that. So Congress is, we're charged to pick up a lot where the executive has left off. And I think I've mentioned some of the things that we're working on, but we really do need a new president to lead this effort.
Thank you, Mr. DeBello.
This is the second pandemic I've lived through, the first being in 2003 while I lived in Shanghai. I operated through that with social distancing, masks, and deploying restrictions. We're doing the same now. The federal government has two responsibilities coming up that I think are critical. One is the private partnership for the vaccine development. And evidently we're close, but I wouldn't get overly optimistic. The deployment, the distribution is complicated. The government needs to take a role from the federal level and the deployment of the vaccine to as many Americans as quickly as possible once that vaccine is proven. The second thing I think is very critical is our supply chain. We've discovered for the first time that through our free and open trade, a lot of our manufacturing, as you know, has gone abroad. China controls a lot of our infrastructure in China. We need to bring it back. Nike has 150,000 employees in China and 5,000 in the US. There's something upside down about that. Let's bring back our jobs, our supply chain, and let's prevent this kind of outrageous pandemic impact that we've had during the last 6 months.
Thank you. Moving on to some foreign policy questions. Mr. DeBello, for you, we have been at war in Afghanistan for nearly 20 years. What can the US do to end the conflict there and bring peace and stability to the region?
I think nation building in the past has been a mistake. I think it's due to America's optimism and trying to promote democracies worldwide. And we've discovered, as intent as we are to promote democracy against totalitarian states, it's costly. It costs us lives of Americans. It costs us our treasure, and the results are nominal. But we can't just exit Afghanistan. We can't just exit and leave a vacuum. The globe now is interconnected, and we have a responsibility as the Western superpower to support our allies, both in South Korea, in Germany, and through Europe, through NATO, and obviously in the Middle East. So it's important to have a presence. I've had the good fortune of running companies in 6 different countries. I understand these different cultures. It's imperative that we work closely with our partners and our allies to prevent totalitarian countries from overtaking us. And I do mean Russia, and I do mean China.
Thank you, Mr. Peters.
I don't think there's much doubt that President Bush's decision to handle Afghanistan and Iraq the way he did were huge mistakes. But once we broke them, we bought them. And we can't just exit as though we didn't do any damage. So we need to keep a presence there for a while. We need to help establish democracies there so that they can stand on their own. Otherwise, this difficult situation will be even worse. We do have to be active in international affairs. I've been shocked and really concerned about the withdrawal of the president from leading in international affairs, whether it's the way he talks about NATO, whether it's his withdrawal from the TPP and international trade agreements, or whether it's his withdrawal from the Iran agreement. The United States has to be in the middle. We have to lead. That's certainly been my perspective as a pro-trade Democrat. I think we need to be involved in the world, not pretend that we can retreat for it, as I think we've seen in this administration.
Thank you very much. Speaking of China, another question is, Congress has failed to stop China stealing our technology and attacking our cybersecurity. What do you think the U.S. policy with China around intellectual property should be? Mr. Peters?
Yeah, I think it starts with having a productive presence in Asia. I was a proponent, one of the few Democrats, 28 of us, I think, who supported the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a 12-nation multilateral trade agreement, which included what became USMCA. That's a mini version included within that. And that's fine, I supported that. But a bigger thing would have been to establish trade relationships with countries in Asia. That's how you push back on the Chinese. You establish a presence there that's based on economics and economic relationships, not just based on how many ships you can put out there. And then we have more leverage to do good trade deals. I think what you've seen because of President Trump's withdrawal, I'd be interested to hear Jim's view on President Trump's view of this, is that we've lost a lot of leverage and we're getting pushed around because we're not asserting our economic power. I think that's what we need to do.
Thank you. Mr. DeBello?
I've lived in China for 3 years. I've worked on the ground with Chinese officials as well as business people. What they respect is tough adversaries. What we haven't been are tough adversaries. We have catered to the Chinese ever since we allowed them into the WTO. And I think that's been a mistake, where they have snuck up with regard to their expansion, not only militarily, but also through their human rights actions, particularly with cybersecurity and the IP theft. It's not uncommon to read in the newspaper of a Chinese citizen walking the fields of Monsanto, taking hybrid strains of corn back to China. It's not uncommon to see threats against our networks from Chinese origins. And I think it's important that we stand firm with the Chinese. We are connected with the Chinese. We are interrelated, and we need to have that relationship close, but we need to be strong in association with our NATO partners. This is a global problem, and we need to face it directly.
Thank you very much. Moving on to some economy and employment questions. Small businesses have suffered during the pandemic. What would you do to open the economy? Mr. DeBello?
I am a small businessman. I ran a public company, but it's considered a small cap company. And I've ran other small entrepreneur companies. I understand what it's like to write the front of a paycheck, to make sure ends meet, to make sure you have enough cash to pay your payroll. So I think it's important that we sustain our small businesses, particularly for the next 6 months, through additional paycheck protection programs and tax incentives, which give the incentive the small business to invest in their footprint. That may be their restaurant, that may be their gym, that may be technology companies. It's important that we support the small business people because, frankly, they make up most of our employment in America. It's a critical element. So understanding how we can provide incentives and less regulation. AB 5 is killing small business and independent freelancers. That's bad legislation. That's the kind of legislation that's going into Washington, which I believe Scott Peters endorses through HR 2474. So I think we have to stop the virus before it affects businesses negatively.
Thank you. Mr. Peters?
Well, I guess I should just say most people know me as a member of Congress and as city council president, port commissioner. But before that, I practiced law for 16 years. And for part of that time, I had my own law firm where I had to pay the bills and make the monthly payments every week. And I know there are pressures of running a business. I think right now where you see that most in San Diego is in the restaurant and hospitality area, where people are really struggling to make ends meet. I supported the Paycheck Protection Plan. I supported funding it again when it ran out of money right away. It's been a successful program. I would take that vote again if Mitch McConnell would let us do more relief, particularly for small businesses targeted at keeping people on the payroll. And we know that we're a lot better off keeping people on the payroll than trying to pick them off of unemployment. So I thought that the PPP was a good program, and I'm proud to have voted for it.
Thank you. This was touched upon, but the second question is AB 5 has negatively impacted thousands of the 1 million independent contractors in the state, yet Congress is considering passing a similar bill. What do you think about that? Mr. Peters?
I think AB 5 is probably a work in progress. I mean, I do think that employers should not be able to get away with not paying their employee benefits by misclassifying workers. We face a new economy, though, where you have some people who have economic power who want to be independent. And also, it may be anachronistic for us to continue to expect that employers provide retirement and health care. That's probably something that the government should do. So I don't think AB 5 is perfect. I said in my press release about our omnibus labor bill that I still thought that there was work to do in that, and I still do. I think that that can be improved upon, but we don't want workers to be taken advantage of. That's the bottom line. And we have to move toward a more modern system where retirement and healthcare decisions aren't driving your decisions about employment. We provide more autonomy to independent employees.
Mr. DeBello? Mr. DeBello?
This is my turn now, Donna? Thank you. There are laws in place already that protect workers' benefits that require classification as full-time employees. I complied with those laws when I ran MyTech and all the other companies I've been involved with. AB 5 is different from that. AB 5 attacks the independent contractor. It's a labor movement effort to raise taxes and to get labor involvement. It disadvantages the mom, the stay-at-home mom, the community worker, the individual artist, or the actor, or the performer, or the scientist who works independently, or the freelance journalist. It prevents them from conducting their business on their terms. We're a country of freedoms and liberties. We deserve to have the right to work the way we want to work. It's our choice. We know the terms going into the job. To unilaterally take that away from Americans, particularly now when we need job creation, is an outrage. There are 50 carve-outs in AB 5, 50 carve-outs for professions that have been taken away. This is bad law, bad legislation. It needs to be repealed.
Thank you very much. Moving on to some health questions. Mr. DeBello, what is your stance on reproductive rights?
We must have an issue. I cannot hear you, Donna.
Oh, okay. Not sure why. What is your stance on reproductive rights?
I hope that's not me because I can't
No,
hear.
What is your stance on reproductive rights is the question.
Well, we've made great strides over the past several decades on women's health care with advances in science and advances in technology application. And we should be very proud of that. I have a daughter who's 22, and I want her to have the best health care available. But let's face it, abortion should be very, very rare, but legal in the case of sexual assault, of rape, or health issues for the mother or her child. The government should not be involved unilaterally in the decisions of a complicated pregnancy. That really is up to the mother, her doctor, and her relationship with her God. Now, over the past 50 years, we've abandoned the lives of 40 million American children through abortion. And I often think about how many scientists, how many educators, how many great American composers or musicians or actors were among them. They'll never have their voice. I prefer to endorse adoption, an adoption for all to help the healthcare for all.
Thank you, Mr. Peters.
I want to be very clear that I'm 100% pro-choice, proudly endorsed by Planned Parenthood and by NARAL. And it's just because I can't understand that there would ever be a situation where the United States government or me as a member of Congress should tell any woman and her family and her doctor what healthcare decisions to make in this context. I think, dealing with this issue is hard enough for families who have to decide what the most loving thing to do and what the best thing is for them. I don't think that the government has any role. Of course, we want it to be, as Bill Clinton said, safe, legal, and rare. We should provide education for people to make sure that they understand sexuality. We should do that early enough to prevent unwanted pregnancies. And certainly we should make adoption available for folks who who aren't able to raise a child, but don't want an abortion. But I can never see an instance where it's appropriate for the federal government to make those medical decisions for women and their families.
Thank you. One other healthcare question. How do you stand on universal single payer healthcare for all Americans, Medicare for all being an example? Mr. Peters?
I'm not signed up to Medicare for all. I think that that's a impractical place to go right now. I think we have 170 million people who get their health care from their employers. You can argue about whether they're happy with it, but it's pretty clear that they don't want to change. What we have to do is focus on the people who don't have insurance, who can't get access to health care. That's a smaller problem than remaking the whole healthcare system anyway. I think we should do that by, make sure that the markets are robust, making sure that we get younger people in through advertising. And I thought the individual mandate was a good approach that was repealed by the Republicans, who continue to try to repeal Obamacare. And we should do some things to lower premiums through reinsurance and some other ideas that we have. That would be more constructive, but we got to get Republicans to understand that this is where we are and we need to move forward. So far, they've said repeal and replace, but they've only talked about repeal.
Thank you, Mr. DeBello.
Scott, this may be the beginning of our debate partnership. I can't hear Donna. Would you repeat that?
The question is, are you for Medicare for all?
Okay, thank you. The answer is I'm not. I'm not for centralized, autocratic, single-payer healthcare programs. And here's why. The lifeblood of America is competition. And we need to foster more competition, albeit more transparency. A couple of things that bug me that I think we need to think about. We have a very dynamic bioscience, biotech, life science arena and industry here in San Diego. We can't impose price controls on them because we want lower drug prices. We need to partner with our industry to help them create new pharmaceutical treatments, but also maintain their employment of these great and magnificent scientists. And this is a key part of the healthcare costs that are spiraling out of control, which the net result is unintended consequences of bad legislation, meaning Medicare for all. So we need to focus on transparency. So I know what I pay when I go into the hospital. I don't know right now. We need to work together with industry to lower those costs and not unilaterally try to control it through a centralized government that's getting too big and not able to manage this complicated process.
Thank you. Moving on to another topic, gun violence. Mr. DeBello, how are you going to tackle gun violence in our country?
Well, gun violence accounts for 40,000 deaths every year, about equal to the number of deaths from auto accidents. The bulk of those are regrettably domestic violence, suicides, and of course, every now and then, unfortunately not recently, mass shootings. It's important that we maintain our liberties with our Second Amendment as we would with our First Amendment or our 13th Amendment. It's our Bill of Rights. It's important that we provide background checks and enforce them. We have the systems in place, they're not connected. We should have a unified central clearinghouse operated by the FBI perhaps, that would allow us to make efficient background checks, allow us to monitor the sale of ammunition appropriately. But let's not constrain the rights bearing and the legal gun ownership that we have in America. This is core to us, core to many, many millions of Americans who act responsibly.
Thank you. Mr. Peters?
Well, first of all, the House has passed H.R. 8, which would provide background checks on all sales of guns. That's sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. It would also provide more time to do those background checks. We know that background checks work. It's a simple thing. And I think that's the most important thing we can do right off the bat. Second is I do think that we ought to look at whether these weapons of war should be on the street. It's tragic that a 17-year-old kid could carry a rifle across state lines and fire into a crowd. And that's ruined not just the lives of his victims, but also his life as well. These kinds of things are obvious to me. They're obvious to every civilized country. And I think they're important to deal with. I'm also working, trying to work in the bipartisan space on what we could do in schools to make sure that students and teachers and administrators see the signs of danger in individuals in their midst to help provide them counseling off the bat. I'm working with Sandy Hook Promise on that. But this is a real tragedy, and I think we've got to stop it. I appreciate the support of the groups who work on it here in San Diego.
Thank you very much. Moving on to some election security and government integrity questions. Given that the 2020 census is coming to a close and redistricting is about to begin, if elected, what policies would you enact to reduce the partisan gerrymandering on a national scale? Mr. Peters?
Yeah, I voted for HR 1, which every Democrat voted for. I don't think we got a single Republican on for reforming the way campaigns take place, but it also would require each state to set up an independent redistricting commission like we have in California. California redrew its lines in 2010 and after the 2010 census without regard to incumbency. And we came up with very competitive districts that are compact. I represent the city of Poway. It's not split up. I represent the city of Coronado. It's not split up. And the northern part of San Diego. It's a very logical district. And then I think we should have a competition of ideas. It was up to me too, and this is not part of our bill, but I think that the top 2 primary system is very good for getting people who can represent best the areas that they run to represent, because you'll always find someone who's more in the middle and less extreme, and I think that would be good for the country. Thank you very much, Mr. DeBello.
Donna, there's just too much political gamesmanship in our system. And this has to stop. That's why Congress's approval rating is 20%. If you're going to talk about gerrymandering, you also have to talk about Puerto Rico, admitting them as a state, or the District of Columbia, admitting them as a state to gain 2 more senatorial positions. It's not right. Politics is a game and an industry in and of itself. That's what I've discovered as a new political candidate. And it's disappointing to me. If you think about our district, even the 52nd district, why would UCSD Medical Center be in the district and UCSD campus not be in the district? It's in a different district. It's right across the street. So this gerrymandering has really been to the disadvantage of our communities. Ask any community member, what's your district congressionally? And they don't know. 52nd, 49th, 50th, where's the border? Where's the boundary? I don't know. It's not right. It should be done by communities. It should maintain the integrity of the communities for the benefit of all Americans.
Thank you very much. This questioner feels President Trump apparently has broken several laws, the Emoluments Clause and the Hatch Act, and if he's reelected, how can he be held accountable? Mr. DeBello?
Well, this is an interesting and challenging question for anybody in America. As I was advised by a colleague who's worked very closely with me, a man from India, the country of India, says, don't look at the lips, look at the feet. I find President Trump's rhetoric reprehensible in many cases. His suggestions today in North Carolina about voting electronically by mail and then at the polls, come on, we don't need that. But I also look at withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, a deal which we gave them billions of dollars to support Hezbollah in Syria, and yet they continue the proliferating nuclear development. I think that was the right move to take away that opportunity and to remove ourselves from that treaty, which was never approved by Congress. The second thing is with regard to NATO, to hold their feet to the fire at their full 2% commitment. So you have to look at the good that's been accomplished in the economic development that has been achieved prior to COVID. And I think the net result is net positive.
Thank you. Mr. Peters?
Well, I mean, I just think what the president is doing is more than rhetoric. The way he's made the Justice Department into his own personal lawyer, threatening his political adversaries with prosecution, that's unforgivable. And we got to stand up against that. And what he did, which was outlined in the Mueller report, which was kind of buried, was cooperating with his campaign was cooperating with Russia. And you've got every single person in his circle, a campaign circle, from Roger Stone to Manafort to Cohen, they're all criminals. And he's in the center of this, and he's not being held accountable. And I think the greatest tragedy right now about the Republican Party is that people won't stand up to it. They change the subject. When you ask them about breaking the law, they talk about Iran. That's not the point. The point is we are a nation of laws, not of men. And this president has broken the law, and everyone ought to stand up against that. Today, he insulted veterans and called people lying in military cemeteries losers. That's the kind of stuff, it's not just rhetoric. That's a failure of leadership, and it's criminal.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have time for one more question. I did let you answer that, didn't I, Mr. DeBello?
Yeah.
Good. The last question, starting with you, Mr. Peters. Congress is not held in high esteem by many of our citizens. Where do you think that is, and what can be done about it?
Well, I do think that people have been running against the government since Ronald Reagan. He's been telling you not to trust Washington, and I think that has an effect over time. I think what also you find is that people don't like Congress, but they like their own Congress member, and so I think you ought to look at that too. Look, what I'm trying to do is to make sure that we restore bipartisanship. I don't go to Washington as part of a partisan army. I was ranked by the National Journal the 4th most independent Democrat in Congress. That causes me not a lot of grief on the right, it caused me a lot of grief on the left. But I understand the basic fact that to get things passed, we have to work with the other party. And we've got to put united back into the United States of America. And one of the things, again, President Trump has done is driven us so far apart, having us fight over everything. That's a fascist tool, but we have to figure out a way to get us back together. And I think if we do that, Congress will have a better rating, and that's what I'm aiming for.
Thank you very much. Mr. DeBello?
She called on you.
I'll begin. It's no wonder there's a credibility gap in Congress when the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, gets her haircut and caught on videotape, then accuses the salon owner. It's the ruling class. It's the power of the incumbency and the danger of the incumbency. And I fear for our country because of that. We have a sclerotic Congress that works within the boundaries of the Beltway and has lost touch with the people. And yes, we can accuse President Trump of illegal activity, and we've seen that every day in the media. But let's not forget the Steele dossier, which was found to be fraudulent. Let's not forget the FBI agents who actually monitored and then changed emails to incriminate people within the Trump administration. It's a two-way street. It can't be sustained this way. We need to bring our country together. But to build credibility, you need people of action and people of focus in Congress who actually get things done. And that's not happening right now.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for giving us such great questions. It's now time for closing statements. So we will start with Mr. Peters. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much again for this opportunity. I thought I'd take just a few minutes to talk about some of the things that I think need to be corrected. And one is this notion that I haven't passed any bills into law. That's just not the case. Let me just go through a few of the ones that were my bills that are passed into law. HR 1047 allows flexibility to nonprofits to use federal housing programs to house the homeless. The Veteran Peer Act, which I introduced, strengthens peer-to-peer counseling at the VA to support mental health for our vets. HR 1379 makes sure that Purple Heart veterans aren't deprived of their GI benefits because their injuries prevented them from meeting the 36-month service requirement. The HYPE Act removes bureaucratic hurdles to adding hydropower to existing dams to produce more carbon-free energy. My bill, HR 5538, ensured that guardsmen and reservists who deployed got the same access to vocational training as the men and women that they deployed with from active duty. The Daniel Somers Network of Support Act designates individuals selected by the service member at the beginning of his or her service to provide support for them through their service to combat isolation and suicide. The Preventing Drug Shortages Act requires drug makers who intend to change or eliminate production of important drugs to notify the government ahead of time so that the nation doesn't run short. And the Employer Participation and Repayment Act allows employers to pay employees student loans up to $5,250 a year without tax to the employee, just like tuition assistance. This notion that I haven't passed bills, those bills become part of other bills, but they are passed. Other bills have passed the House and we'll try to pass them through the Senate. I think I've talked about my commitment to San Diego, all the funds we brought there. And just as far as the business climate, I do very much appreciate that not only am I endorsed by labor, but by the local Chamber of Commerce and the National Chamber of Commerce, because I'm willing to work with anyone to get things done. I think that's what San Diegans want, and I hope you'll support my reelection. Thank you again very much for the evening.
Thank you very much. Mr. DeBello, can you hear me any better?
Yes, I can hear you now. And let me begin. Scott, I think this is a great reason why we should meet more often to discuss this in debate prior to November 3rd. And I do challenge you to additional debates, and I'd be happy to have the League of Women Voters host them or do it on television. I was taught long ago that the key to success is focus. I remember meeting a very prominent businessman and investor who said, Jim, the 5 words for success are focus, 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 and focus. And yet our Congress today is not focused. They're trying to do too many things, proposing all these different policies, yet nothing gets done. Look at the feet, not at the lips. And Scott, I did study your record. I went to your website. I've studied it on gov.org, and I encourage all the ladies and men on this call to do the same. And other than the naming rights, where you authored that bill for the local judicial office, everything else that's been passed has been rolled up into other people's legislation. Let me just tell you, bill removes barriers, expands existing in the peer counseling, expands education benefits, extends construction permitting. These are bureaucratic and administrative issues. Scott, we need leadership. We need courageous action. We need people to stand up on the soapbox to solve Tijuana river sewage issues, but more importantly, the homelessness, which is an outrage for us Americans and we in San Diego. And that takes focus, and that takes federal partnership and activity to get things done. And that's what I bring, a track record of getting things done. I have the skills as a professional who have innovated with technology, and we are in the 21st century, and we need to be more aggressive in investing in R&D. We need to foster more development of technologies to solve our climate issues and to solve this economic challenge that we have ahead of us. Jobs are going away and need to be recreated, just like they did with agriculture going in the Industrial Revolution. We're at the same phase in the 21st century. That's why I present a different level of skill sets and passion that I believe after 8 years, it's time for a change.
Thank you very much. A couple of items before we leave. I want to make sure everyone listening is making sure they're registered to vote, that their address is correct, and that they fill out their census form. Also, please check the League calendar at lwvsandiego.org for more of our League events where we give in-depth information on all sides of critical issues. On behalf of the Clairemont Town Council and the League of Women Voters, I want to thank the candidates for running for office and attending our forum this evening. And thank you all again, because you are here tonight because you're following the League motto, don't just be a voter, be an informed voter. You will, as a registered voter, be receiving your ballot by mail, so drop it off or email it by November 3rd and encourage others to vote as well. Thank you all and good night.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.